My parents refused to visit me in the hospital after a car crash and blamed me for it, then lied to the family. A couple of years ago, when I was in college, I was in a terrible car accident. A drunk truck driver slammed into my car, and I ended up in the hospital for weeks. I fractured my arm, and it took me a long time to learn how to walk again, even longer for the scars to fade. Even though it's been almost 3 years since the accident, I'm still extra careful when driving, despite the fact that the accident wasn't even my fault. The thing that sticks with me the most from that time? My parents refused to show up for me because my sister had gone into labor. Ironically, I was on my way to surprise my sister at the hospital when the accident happened. I was only a couple of weeks away from graduating, and my college was a few hours from my hometown, close enough for me to travel back and forth. So when my parents called to say that my sister, Marlo, had gone into labor and they were taking her to the hospital, I decided to borrow a friend's car and drive there as a surprise. I never made it. I got hit by a drunk driver and was rushed to the nearest hospital. My parents were too busy with Marlo, so it was mostly my friends who took care of me. I understood that. What I didn't understand was why, even days after my sister gave birth, my parents still didn't bother to visit me. I called them several times despite the pain I was in. I was slipping in and out of consciousness frequently, but I still kept asking if my parents had called or come to see me. And I was disappointed every time. Finally, a week after my accident, my parents called me. Not to ask if I was okay. They called to ask why I had been calling them so much, because they had been deliberately ignoring my calls since they were focused on Marlo and the baby. I was shocked by how cold they were. But I still asked how Marlo was doing and how the baby was. They said both were fine. They never asked how I was. At that point, I figured they already knew I had been in an accident. My friends had texted them repeatedly on every possible platform. When they still didn't ask, I told them myself. I explained that I had been in a bad accident, had been trying to reach them for days, and had been hoping to hear from them. I expected some kind of reaction. Instead, they just said, "Yeah, we know. Your friends told us." That was it. Not a single word of concern. I was heartbroken. I asked them why they couldn't even pretend to care, and that's when they told me they ignored my calls on purpose because they thought it was more important to be with Marlo while she was giving birth than to deal with me after an accident I caused. I was completely confused. I wasn't the one who had been drinking, I was hit by a drunk driver. But they clarified, they didn't mean it was my fault in the traditional sense. They believed I had caused the accident myself by making the reckless decision to drive alone at night. I told them I had been driving to the hospital to see Marlo. They still dismissed it, saying that I shouldn't have been on the road in the first place and had nobody to blame but myself. At that point, I hung up. Later, I found out something even worse. When emergency responders arrived at the crash site, they called my parents first. And my parents refused to come. They even told emergency services not to call them again about it. That's how my college found out, because the paramedics called my school instead, thanks to my student ID. So my friends rushed to the hospital. But my own parents refused to show up. And when they finally acknowledged my accident, their only response was to blame me. That's when I realized something. I had been fighting to be there for my family, but my family had no interest in being there for me. Even Marlo never reached out. I haven't spoken to them in 3 years. It wasn't that I was mad at them for prioritizing Marlo while she was in labor, I completely understood that. I was hurt that even after she gave birth, they didn't think it was important to come check on me. Marlo had her fiancé, her in-laws, and my parents with her. I only had my friends. And thank God for them. They helped me recover, paid my medical bills when I had no one else, and even helped with my expenses. I'm still paying them back. But I will never be able to fully repay them for everything they did for me. Meanwhile, my parents and Marlo never once reached out in the last 3 years. Until recently. Because now, they have a problem. My parents lied to the family about what happened, and it backfired on them. For 3 years, my parents and Marlo never once reached out to me. But recently, my Aunt Callista called me out of the blue. Apparently, my parents had hosted a family gathering to celebrate Marlo's promotion at work, and at some point, the topic of my estrangement came up. For 3 years, we had an unspoken agreement that we wouldn't talk about it with the rest of the family. But that night, my parents decided to break the silence. And they completely changed the story of what happened after my accident. They told everyone that they hadn't even heard about my accident until days later, long after I was out of the hospital. That they had no idea why I hadn't contacted them sooner. That as soon as they found out, they immediately called me, but I was so angry with them that I refused to speak to them. And that they had tried repeatedly to reach out to me, but I had cut them off over a misunderstanding. They made it seem like I had been holding a grudge for 3 years for no reason. Basically, they turned the whole thing around to make me look like the villain. But Callista, being the good Samaritan she is, decided to reach out to me afterward. She told me that my parents missed me and that I was missing out on being an aunt to Marlowe's daughter, Opal. She encouraged me to reconnect with them. I was confused at first, so I asked her exactly what my parents had said. And when she told me, I was furious. They had lied. They had erased everything they did, all the coldness, all the blame, all the ignoring, just to protect their own reputation. So, for the first time in 3 years, I told someone in my family the truth. I told Callista that my parents had been contacted by emergency responders first. That they had refused to come and had told them not to call again. That they ignored every call and text from my friends, even though they knew I had been in an accident. That when they finally spoke to me, they blamed me for being on the road that night. And that they never once apologized. Callista was shocked. She even apologized to me for doubting me. And from there, word spread. Once Callista heard my side, other relatives started to hear about it too. A lot of people in the family reached out to me, saying they had no idea what had actually happened. Many told me that they would have been there for me if they had known. But the most surprising part? People actually started distancing themselves from my parents. They didn't like that my parents had not only abandoned me during a life-threatening accident but also lied about it years later to cover themselves. This all happened right before Opal's 3rd birthday party. And suddenly, my parents had a huge problem. Nobody in the family wanted to talk to them. They had sent out invitations for Opal's party, but no one was responding. Some had already declined without even giving an excuse. And instead of taking responsibility, they blamed me. Even though I hadn't told everyone, Callista had. They started blowing up my phone, sending texts and calls, accusing me of doing this on purpose to steal Marlowe's spotlight. They said I was still bitter that they had chosen to be with Marlowe while she was giving birth instead of visiting me in the hospital. That this was my revenge. That I had gotten into my car that night on purpose, so I could create drama and take the attention off Marlowe. The worst part? They actually said I had crashed my car on purpose just to get sympathy. As if I had planned to be hit by a drunk driver. It was disgusting. I ignored their texts. Blocked their numbers. But then, 2 days before Opal's party, they actually showed up at my door. I opened the door to find my parents standing outside. They weren't there to apologize. They were there to demand that I fix the situation. They wanted me to call Callista and the rest of the family and tell them that I had lied, that I had exaggerated everything to make them look bad. They told me I owed them this because Opal was looking forward to her birthday party, and if the family didn't show up, it would ruin her day. I told them to leave. When they refused, I said I would call the cops. They didn't budge. So I snapped. I shoved them off my property. At first, they were too shocked to react. But when they started yelling at me again, I kept pushing them back until they were off my driveway. I was so angry that I even screamed at them. I hope a car hits you, and nobody comes to visit you in the hospital, just like you did to me. I don't think I've ever seen my parents look so stunned. I went back inside and ignored them. Later, Marlowe called and said that what I had done was excessive, that I should have just called the cops instead of getting physical. She said I had traumatized our parents and that I owed them an apology. And honestly, even I feel a little bad about how I handled it. Because here's something I haven't mentioned before. I'm a trained MMA fighter. Not a professional, but strong enough that getting physical with my parents was not a fair fight. According to Marlowe, I even left bruises on them. Though I suspect she exaggerated that to make me feel guilty. Now, she's threatening to press charges if I don't apologize and tell the family that I had lied about everything. But here's the thing. I wasn't lying. And I refuse to apologize for telling the truth. Update 1, I'm not apologizing. It has been 2 days since my last update, and after thinking it over, and reading through all the advice I got, I have decided not to apologize to my parents. And I have also decided that I will no longer interact with Marlo. For a while, I gave her the benefit of the doubt because she had been kind to me when we were kids. But now? I see her for what she really is, just as manipulative as our parents. She sat there for 3 years knowing exactly what happened and still let them lie about it. And now she's threatening me with legal action just to force an apology out of me? Absolutely not. I'm not playing their game anymore. I have blocked my parents again. I have also blocked Marlo. If she does try to press charges, I'll deal with it then. But I refuse to be bullied into saying sorry for something I do not regret. Update 2, no one showed up to the party. Today was supposed to be Opal's 3rd birthday party. And my parents had invited the entire extended family. But nobody came. Callista called me earlier and told me that every single person in our family had skipped the party. Not just because of what happened 3 years ago, but because my parents lied about it and tried to manipulate everyone again. People don't like being played. And my parents? They tried to play everyone. Callista also told me something that broke me a little. Had the family known about my accident back then, they would have been there for me. But because I had kept it private, no one had any idea. I deactivated my social media at the time. I refused to talk about what had happened. And because of that, people just assumed I was fine. I never realized how much I had been suppressing for the last 3 years, until I broke down crying on the phone with Callista. For so long, I thought I had nobody. But the truth was, I just never let anyone in. Now, I finally feel like I have family again. Real family. Not my parents. Not Marlo. But people who actually care. Update 3, my parents tried to save face, and failed. It has been a week since the party disaster, and my parents have finally given up. I know this because they sent me an email from a brand new account, since I had them blocked everywhere else. In it, they said they regret how they treated me after the accident, but that they were under a lot of stress because of Marlo's delivery. They admitted that they should have come to see me. But they also made sure to downplay everything, as if it was just a minor mistake. They didn't say, "We abandoned you." They said, "We got caught up in other things." They didn't say, "We ignored your calls on purpose." They said, "We should have made more of an effort." They didn't say, "We lied to the entire family." They said, "We didn't want to get into all the details." And the most telling part of their email? They only wrote it because nobody in the family will talk to them anymore. They ended the email by saying they had cleared the air with me and that they would appreciate it if the family would stop judging them over the past. They even posted a statement on social media saying that our family drama had been resolved and that people should respect their privacy. Basically, they weren't apologizing to me. They were just trying to do damage control. I responded with one sentence. Don't contact me again. And I meant it. They don't get to rewrite the past. They don't get to pretend that we're all good now just because they're facing the consequences of their own actions. They made their choice 3 years ago. And now? I've made mine. Final thoughts. This will probably be my last update because, as far as I'm concerned, this chapter of my life is closed. I have no intention of speaking to my parents again. I have no intention of speaking to Marlo again. The only thing I feel bad about? Opal. She's just a kid. She had nothing to do with this. But at the end of the day, she is not my responsibility. She has parents who can take care of her. And maybe one day, when she's old enough to understand, she'll reach out to me herself. Until then? I'm done. This family is no longer my burden to carry. Thank you for watching the video, like it if you watched the video to the end and don't forget to subscribe. Have a nice day.